She'd hidden the cyanide capsule in her mouth for 3 days, tucked between her cheek and gum where the guards wouldn't find it during inspections. The glass vial was no bigger than a pill, filled with poison that would kill her in seconds. Kill her baby even faster. October 1945, San Francisco Bay. Haruko Yamamoto stood on the transport ship's deck, clutching her 8-month-old daughter against her chest, feeling the infant's heartbeat flutter like a trapped bird. Around them, American soldiers moved with rifles and clipboards. The propaganda had been specific. Americans would take Japanese children first, rip them from their mother's arms, do unspeakable things. Haruko had made her decision. If they tried to take Yuki, she would bite down on the capsule, swallow fast, and force the poison into her daughter through her milk one final time. Better a quick death than whatever horrors awaited them on enemy soil. The ship groaned against the dock. Cold October wind cut through Haruko's thin prison uniform, the fabric designed for Manila's heat, doing nothing against California's bite. Yuki whimpered, and Haruko held her tighter, so tight the baby began to cry. "Move along," an American voice barked in English. Haruko's legs wouldn't obey. Her tongue found the capsule, rolling it forward in her mouth, getting it into position. 3 seconds. That's all it would take. Then something happened that shattered everything. An American soldier approached her, young, maybe 20, with red hair and freckles covering his pale face. But instead of reaching for Yuki with violence, he was smiling. Actually smiling. He said something in English, his tone soft, and reached toward the crying baby with open hands. Haruko's scream tore out of her throat before thought could catch it. "Watashi no akachan ni sawaranaide." "Don't touch my baby." She jerked backwards so violently she nearly fell. The capsule shifted in her mouth. One wrong move, and she'd bite down accidentally, kill them both right here on this dock before the Americans even had a chance to do it themselves. The soldier froze. His hands were still extended, but his face showed pure shock. Then something that looked like hurt. He took a step back, raising his hands higher in a gesture that transcended language. "I'm not a threat. I won't hurt you." Other soldiers had stopped what they were doing. The dock, which had been buzzing with the activity of prisoner processing, fell into awkward silence. Haruko stood trembling, Yuki screaming against her chest, the capsule heavy on her tongue, waiting for the violence to begin. But it didn't come. An older officer pushed through the crowd of soldiers. He had gray at his temples and captain's bars on his collar. He said something sharp to the red-haired soldier, who backed away further, his hands still raised. Then the captain turned to Haruko and spoke slowly, his voice calm but firm. She didn't understand the words, but his tone said, "Nobody's going to hurt you. You're safe." She didn't believe him. Couldn't believe him. Safety from Americans was a contradiction in terms. A Japanese-American woman in an army uniform appeared, moving carefully, her own hands visible and empty. She spoke in Japanese, and the sound of her native language in this foreign place made Haruko's knees weak. "Nobody wants to take your baby," the woman said gently. "The soldier just wanted to help. He thought maybe you needed assistance with your child. He wasn't trying to hurt her." Haruko stared at her, chest heaving, not daring to believe it. The interpreter gave her a small, sad smile. "I know what you've been told," she said quietly. "I know what the propaganda promised. But it's not true. Your baby is safe. You're both safe. I promise you." Haruko's tongue worked in her mouth, pushing the capsule back into its hiding place. Not yet. She wouldn't use it yet. but she'd keep it close, just in case this mercy was temporary. The war had taught Haruko many things, but the most important lesson was this: hope was dangerous. Hope got you killed. She'd learned that lesson in Manila, where she'd lived with her husband Takeshi and their infant daughter in a small apartment near the port. Takeshi worked as a supply clerk for the Imperial Japanese Army. It wasn't glamorous work, but it kept them fed, kept them safe. Until it didn't. February 1945. The Americans closed in on Manila like a fist tightening around a throat. The battle that followed turned the city into hell on earth. Buildings exploded. Fire consumed entire neighborhoods. The sound of artillery never stopped, day or night, until Haruko thought she'd go mad from the noise. Takeshi died in March, killed by American shelling during the final days of fighting. Haruko had been hiding in a basement with Yuki, who was just 2 months old then. Takeshi had gone out to find food and never came back. She'd found his body 3 days later, what was left of it buried under rubble. She'd survived by hiding, by keeping Yuki quiet, which meant not feeding her as much as she needed. A hungry baby cries less than a satisfied one. It was a horrible calculation, but it kept them alive when the Americans came through clearing buildings. When they were finally found and rounded up with other Japanese civilians, Haruko had expected execution. The propaganda had been clear and constant throughout the war. Americans were barbarians. They would show no mercy. Women and children would suffer most. Some women had been given instructions on how to kill their children quickly, mercifully, before the Americans could do worse. Haruko had found the cyanide capsule on a dead soldier's body. She'd kept it hidden, a terrible insurance policy. During the voyage across the Pacific, she'd practiced the mechanics of suicide dozens of times. Roll the capsule into position, bite down, swallow fast, feed Yuki one last time so the poison would pass through her milk. They'd die together. At least they'd be together. But standing on this San Francisco dock with American soldiers surrounding her, something didn't match. The red-haired soldier's face when she'd screamed at him. That hadn't been the face of a demon. That had been the face of a confused young man who just wanted to help a crying baby. They were herded, though herded felt too harsh for how gently they were treated, into a processing building near the dock. It was a large warehouse that had been converted into a temporary reception center. Tables lined the room, each staffed by military personnel. The smell of coffee filled the air, strong and bitter and impossibly rich. Haruko moved through the line in a daze, Yuki still clutched against her chest. At each station, the Japanese-American interpreter translated questions. Name, age, place of birth. Any family in Japan? Any illnesses? The questions were boring, bureaucratic. This wasn't interrogation. This was paperwork. Then came the medical station, and Haruko's heart nearly stopped. A sign in English read, "Medical examination," and below it, someone had added Japanese characters, Jian Kang Jian Cha, health inspection. This was it. This was where they'd take Yuki. But instead of armed soldiers, she found a middle-aged doctor with kind eyes and a female nurse who smiled warmly. Through the interpreter, they explained that they needed to check both Haruko and her baby for illnesses or injuries that needed treatment. "You don't have to give her your baby," the interpreter assured her. "The doctor just needs to make sure the child is healthy." Slowly, with trembling hands, Haruko loosened her death grip on Yuki. The doctor approached with exaggerated slowness, his movements careful and deliberate. He listened to the baby's heartbeat with a stethoscope, examined her eyes and ears, gently felt her belly. Throughout the examination, he spoke in a soft, soothing tone that Haruko couldn't understand, but recognized as gentle. She's severely underweight, the interpreter translated, but otherwise healthy. Malnourished, probably because you've been malnourished and couldn't produce enough milk. We'll make sure you get proper food and formula for her. Then it was Haruko's turn. The nurse checked her pulse, her blood pressure, looked in her eyes and throat. The doctor's expression grew serious when he examined her. "You're dangerously malnourished and anemic," he said through the interpreter. "You need proper nutrition immediately. We'll make sure you're fed adequately." The nurse spoke then, her voice carrying genuine concern through the translation. "We're going to take care of both of you. I promise." Haruko didn't know how to process this. Where was the cruelty? Where was the punishment? Every moment without violence only deepened her confusion and suspicion. Kindness from the enemy felt more dangerous than hatred would have. Hatred, she understood. This strange compassion was incomprehensible. After processing, they were led to what the Americans called a mess hall. The room was enormous, filled with long tables and benches. At one end, steam rose from behind a counter where military cooks worked. The smell hit Haruko like a physical force food, real food, being cooked in quantities she couldn't comprehend. The Japanese women and children formed a line. Haruko watched as people ahead of her received metal trays, then moved down the counter as cooks spooned food onto their plates. When her turn came, a large black soldier smiled at her and said something cheerful in English before loading her tray with scrambled eggs, toast, some kind of meat, and fruit. Actual fruit and orange, already peeled and sectioned, glowing like gold. Then the cook added a bottle of prepared formula, already mixed and ready for Yuki. He pointed to the baby and gave Haruko a thumbs up, his smile broad and genuine. Haruko stared at the bottle in disbelief. Formula. Real baby formula. For Yuki. She found a seat at one of the long tables, setting the tray down carefully like it might vanish. Around her, other Japanese women were having the same experience, staring at plates filled with more food than they'd seen in months, maybe years. Some were crying. Others sat frozen, unable to move. One elderly woman near Haruko picked up a piece of toast, examined it closely, then bit into it. Tears streamed down her weathered face as she chewed. "Real bread," she whispered in Japanese. "It's real bread." Haruko fed Yuki first. The baby drank hungrily from the bottle, her small hands waving in contentment. Watching her daughter eat, actually eat and be satisfied, filled Haruko with a complex mixture of relief, joy, and crushing guilt. For 6 months, she'd struggled to feed this child. She'd watched Yuki grow thinner, heard her cries grow weaker, felt like a failure as a mother. Now, in enemy hands, her baby was finally getting the nutrition she desperately needed. When Yuki finished and dozed off, Haruko turned to her own food. She picked up the fork, a real metal fork, and pierced a piece of scrambled egg. It was warm, seasoned, perfectly cooked. She put it in her mouth, and her eyes immediately filled with tears. The taste was almost overwhelming. For so long, she'd eaten whatever scraps she could find. Moldy rice, vegetable peelings, once even tree bark ground into paste. This was real food, prepared with care, offered freely. She ate slowly, trying to make it last, trying to memorize this feeling because surely it couldn't continue. Across the table, a young mother about her age was openly sobbing as she ate. An American officer walked through the mess hall, observing. He stopped near Haruko's table and said something to his companion. Through the ambient noise, Haruko heard the interpreter translating for someone else. "Make sure all the mothers with infants get extra formula. And someone check if we have any diapers available." Diapers. They were thinking about diapers. The enemy was concerned about whether Japanese babies had clean diapers. Haruko looked down at Yuki, sleeping peacefully in her arms, her tiny belly finally full. Then she looked at her own half-empty plate, at the orange slices she hadn't yet touched, at the other women around her slowly beginning to accept this surreal reality. The contradiction was almost unbearable. How could the monsters of propaganda be the same people who worried about baby formula and diapers? After the meal, they were transported by bus to what the Americans called a relocation center. The camp was located inland, surrounded by scrubland and distant mountains. Rows of wooden barracks stretched across dusty ground, organized in neat blocks. Guard towers stood at the corners, but Haruko noticed they were unmanned. The fence that surrounded the camp was there, but it wasn't heavily fortified. This wasn't a prison designed to hold dangerous criminals. It was a temporary holding facility. Haruko was assigned to Barrack 7, Room C, a small space about 12 feet square that she would share with 2 other mothers and their children. The room was sparse but clean. 3 metal frame beds with thin mattresses, 3 small lockers, 1 light bulb, 1 window. But what shocked Haruko most was what waited on each bed: folded sheets, a blanket, a pillow. On the locker next to what would be her bed sat a small stack of supplies: cloth diapers, safety pins, a bar of soap, a towel, and another can of powdered milk formula. She stood in the doorway, unable to move. One of her roommates, a woman named Chiyo with a toddler son, picked up the soap and held it to her nose. "It smells like flowers," she whispered, wonder in her voice. The third woman, Hana, younger and with an infant daughter, sat on her bed and began to cry quietly. "Why are they doing this?" she asked no one in particular. "Why are they being kind?" It was the question on everyone's mind. That night, lying on a real mattress with a real pillow, listening to Yuki's soft breathing beside her, Haruko took the cyanide capsule from its hiding place in her mouth. She'd kept it there all day, even while eating. Tucked against her cheek, she held it up to the single light bulb. The glass caught the light, the liquid inside amber-colored and innocent-looking. This tiny thing had been her plan, her escape route, her final act of mercy. Now it felt obscene. She'd been so certain she would need it, so certain that American cruelty would necessitate a quick death. But instead, she'd been given food, medical care, a bed, supplies for her daughter. Not just the bare minimum either, but thoughtful additions: formula, diapers, soap that smelled like flowers. Haruko got up carefully, not wanting to wake Yuki or her roommates. She went to the small bathroom at the end of the barracks and flushed the capsule down the toilet, watched it swirl away in the water, disappearing into pipes that led somewhere she couldn't see. She'd just destroyed her insurance policy. If the Americans decided to be cruel tomorrow, she'd have no escape. But she couldn't keep carrying death in her mouth while surrounded by kindness. The two couldn't coexist. The days fell into routines that felt surreal in their ordinariness. Wake at 7, breakfast at 8, work assignments at 9 for those who volunteered. Haruko volunteered for the camp kitchen, helping to prepare meals, partly to contribute, partly to earn the small amount of camp currency, partly to stay busy so she wouldn't have time to think about how nothing made sense. The kitchen was run by American cooks who treated the Japanese volunteers with casual friendliness. One cook, a heavy-set man named Frank with a thick mustache, made silly faces at Yuki every morning when Haruko came in. He'd cross his eyes and stick out his tongue until the baby giggled. a sound that never failed to make Frank laugh too. "She's a cutie," he'd say, even though Haruko didn't understand the words. But she understood his tone. His affection was genuine. The camp had a small medical clinic that operated twice a week. A doctor and nurse conducted checkups for all the children and pregnant women. When Yuki developed a mild fever, Haruko panicked and brought her in immediately. The nurse, a kind woman named Betty, examined Yuki thoroughly, then gave Haruko medicine and instructions through an interpreter. She returned the next day to check on the baby's progress. In Manila, when Yuki was sick, I could only pray, Haruko wrote in a notebook she'd been given. I had no medicine, no doctor, no help. Here, I mention a fever, and within hours, a nurse is checking on her. How do I reconcile these realities? Letters began arriving from Japan in the third month. The camp administration had established a mail system through the Red Cross to help internees contact surviving family members. Haruko received a letter from her mother in Hiroshima. Her mother had been visiting relatives in the countryside when the atomic bomb fell, so she'd survived. But the letter's contents were harrowing. Our city is gone. Everything is ash. We're living in a shelter made from scrap metal. There's barely any food. Your father is sick, coughing blood. I think from the bomb's poison, though he wasn't in the city when it fell. People are dying every day from sickness, from starvation, from despair. If you're alive, if you're reading this, know that I'm grateful. But I cannot imagine where you are or how you've survived. Please, if you can, come home. We need you." Haruko read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully. That evening at dinner, she stared at her plate. Pot roast, potatoes, carrots, bread, a small salad, and a glass of milk. The milk alone was more nutrition than her mother was getting in a week. She couldn't eat. The guilt physically choked her. She wrapped the bread in a napkin, thinking she could send it to her mother before realizing how absurd that was. She couldn't send food through a letter. All she could send were words. And what words could bridge the gap between her mother's reality and her own? Other women in the camp were receiving similar letters. The common area would sometimes echo with quiet weeping as women read news from home, cities in ruins, family members dead or missing, widespread starvation, disease, despair. And then they would go to the mess hall and be served 3 full meals a day. They would take their children to the camp clinic and receive free medical care. They would sleep in beds with clean sheets, wash with soap, drink clean water. The contradiction was crushing. "We are prisoners," Chio said one evening as they sat in their shared room. "But we live better than we did when we were free. We live better than our families in Japan live now. What kind of captivity is this?" Hana, nursing her daughter, spoke quietly. "My mother wrote that there are no hospitals functioning in Tokyo. Women are giving birth in ruins with no doctors, no medicine. Many mothers and babies are dying." She placed her hand on her daughter's head. "Here, I see a doctor every week. They're monitoring my daughter's growth. They gave me vitamins. How can I hate people who are saving my child's life?" But hatred would have been simpler. Hatred would have made sense. This confused gratitude mixed with guilt, mixed with grief, mixed with anger at a situation they couldn't control. This was far more difficult to bear. Despite the language barrier, small moments of human connection began to emerge between the internees and their American guards and staff. These moments were often awkward, sometimes uncomfortable, but undeniably real. Private Tommy O'Brien was a 21-year-old soldier from Boston who'd lost his best friend in the Pacific. He should have had every reason to view the Japanese internees with hatred. Instead, he became known for his gentleness with the mothers and children. Every afternoon, O'Brien would make rounds past the family barracks. And he always carried a pocket full of candies. At first, the Japanese mothers wouldn't let their children take them. Who knew what they might contain? But after a few weeks, when it became clear that the children who took the candy suffered no ill effects beyond sticky fingers and sugar rushes, resistance crumbled. O'Brien learned a few words of Japanese. His pronunciation was atrocious, but his efforts were genuine. One afternoon, he stopped by when Haruko was sitting outside her barrack, trying to soothe a fussy Yuki in the warm sunshine. He approached slowly and pulled out a small photograph from his wallet. It showed a young woman holding an infant. He pointed to the woman. "My wife," he said. Then to the baby. "My daughter." Then he pointed to Yuki and gave a thumbs up, his smile broad and genuine. In that moment, something shifted in Haruko's chest. This young soldier was a father too. He was thousands of miles from his own baby daughter, showing pictures to an enemy mother because it was the only way he could feel close to his family. The war had taken him from his child, just as it had taken Haruko's husband from Yuki. They were both parents, both suffering, both trying to survive. Haruko pointed to the photo, then to O'Brien. "Beautiful, beautiful baby," she said in halting English, words she'd picked up from listening to others. O'Brien's eyes got suspiciously bright. He nodded, smiled, carefully put the photo away, and continued his rounds. But after that, he always stopped to check on Yuki, to make faces that made the baby laugh, to share a moment of connection that transcended war and language and politics. At night, after Yuki fell asleep, Haruko would write in her notebook by the dim light of the single bulb in their room. November 15th, 1945. Today, Yuki smiled at Private O'Brien. She actually smiled at him, reached for him with her tiny hands. She doesn't know he's American. She doesn't know he's supposed to be the enemy. To her, he's just a kind face that makes funny expressions. But I know what he represents. I know his country killed my husband. I know his bombers destroyed my city. And yet, when he shows me pictures of his own daughter, and I see the love in his eyes, I cannot hate him. What kind of wife am I? What kind of Japanese woman? My husband died fighting these people, and here I am accepting their food, their medicine, their kindness. Is this survival, or is it betrayal? The question haunted her. She'd ask it over and over in her notebook, in her thoughts, in whispered conversations with other women who struggled with the same guilt. One evening in December, an argument erupted in the common area. A woman named Tomoko, who had lost 2 sons in the war, confronted Haruko publicly. "I see you," Tomoko said, her voice shaking with anger. "I see you smiling at them. I see you letting your daughter play with the soldier who hands out candy. Have you forgotten what they did? Have you forgotten your husband?" The accusation hit Haruko like a physical blow. Other women watched in uncomfortable silence. "I have not forgotten," Haruko replied quietly. "I will never forget. But my daughter is alive. She is healthy. If we were in Japan right now, she would probably be dead. What would you have me do? Let her starve to prove my loyalty to a country that no longer exists?" "The country still exists," Tomoko snapped. "Does it?" Haruko asked, and the question hung heavy in the air. "My mother's letters tell me otherwise. They tell me of ruins and starvation and death. They tell me of a nation that has been destroyed. What loyalty do I owe to that?" Chiyo stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Tomoko, I understand your anger. I share it. But we are mothers. Our first loyalty must be to our children. If accepting help from the Americans means our children survive, then we accept that help. What good is pride if our children die? The argument didn't resolve anything, but it brought the central conflict into the open. The women were divided, not cleanly, but in the messy way real people are divided when facing impossible choices. Christmas 1945 brought another challenge. The American staff decorated the mess hall with pine branches and paper snowflakes. They announced there would be a special Christmas dinner and gifts for all the children. Many of the Japanese women didn't know what to make of this. Christmas wasn't a familiar holiday. The idea of celebrating an American holiday felt wrong, almost offensive. But their children were excited, feeding off the festive energy of the American staff, and it was hard to deny them that joy. On Christmas Eve, Private O'Brien appeared with an armful of wrapped packages. Through an interpreter, he explained that he and other soldiers had taken up a collection to buy gifts for all the children in the family barracks. For Yuki, now 10 months old and just learning to sit up on her own, there was a soft stuffed rabbit with floppy ears. O'Brien demonstrated how squeezing its paw made it squeak, and Yuki's delighted laugh filled the room. Haruko watched O'Brien play with Yuki, making the rabbit hop across the floor while the baby squealed with joy. She watched other soldiers distributing gifts, their faces showing genuine happiness at the children's reactions. These men weren't doing this because they were ordered to. They were doing it because they wanted to bring joy to children who had suffered. They were doing it because, despite the uniforms and the war and the national boundaries, they recognized these Japanese children as simply children who deserved kindness. That evening, Haruko wrote, December 24th, 1945. I think I finally understand. The propaganda didn't just lie about American cruelty. It lied about something deeper. It told us that nationality and race made us fundamentally different, that Americans could never see us as fully human, that we could never see them as fully human. But I watch Private O'Brien, a young man from a place called Boston, play with my daughter, and I see that he loves children the same way I do. I see that he misses his own daughter the same way I missed Yuki during the worst of the war. I see that he grieves for his dead friends the same way I grieve for my husband. The war tried to make us hate each other by telling us we were different species. But we are not. We are all just humans, trying to survive, trying to protect our children, trying to find meaning in a world that often makes no sense. This is not betrayal of my country. This is recognition of a deeper truth. In February 1946, announcements began appearing on the camp bulletin boards. Repatriation to Japan would begin soon. Ships were being prepared. Lists would be posted. The reaction was complex. Some women were overjoyed. Finally, they would see their families again. Others were terrified. They knew what awaited them in Japan. They knew their children, now healthy and thriving, would be returning to a place of suffering. Haruko's name appeared on the first list. She would leave in 3 weeks. The night she saw her name, she couldn't sleep. She kept looking at Yuki, who was sleeping peacefully in her crib. A real crib the camp had provided when Yuki outgrew her basket. The baby was plump and healthy now, with round cheeks and sturdy limbs. She was learning to pull herself up, to babble sounds that almost seemed like words. She was thriving. In Japan, she would be hungry again. There would be no formula, no regular meals, no warm clothes, no medical care. Everything Yuki had gained would be lost. The thought was unbearable. The day before departure, Haruko was called to the camp administration building. The Japanese-American interpreter, Mrs. Tanaka, was there along with the camp administrator, Captain Davis. Through Mrs. Tanaka, Captain Davis spoke. "Mrs. Yamamoto, we've been corresponding with Red Cross offices in Japan about your family situation. We understand your mother and household are in severe need in Hiroshima. We want you to know we're arranging for your family to receive aid through Red Cross channels. Food, medical supplies, temporary shelter materials. It's not much, but it's something." Haruko stared at him, not understanding. "Why?" she finally asked in her halting English. "Why help?" Captain Davis looked uncomfortable, as if he hadn't expected the question. He spoke directly to her, even though she might not understand all the words. Mrs. Tanaka translated, "Because the war is over. Because you're a mother trying to take care of your child. Because your family is suffering through no fault of their own. Because it's the right thing to do." Then he added something else, speaking more slowly. "My son died at Guadalcanal. He was 18. Every time I see the children in this camp, I think about him. I think about how the war took him before he could have children of his own. I can't bring him back, but I can make sure other children survive. Japanese children are children. They didn't start this war. They shouldn't pay for it with their lives." In that moment, everything Haruko had been holding back for months finally broke. She began to cry, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. All the grief, all the fear, all the confusion, all the guilt poured out in waves. This man had lost his son to Japanese soldiers. He had every reason to hate her, to hate all Japanese people. Yet here he was, arranging aid for her family, explaining himself to her, treating her with dignity and respect. "I'm sorry," she managed to say through her tears in Japanese. "I'm so sorry about your son." Mrs. Tanaka translated. Captain Davis nodded. "Thank you," he said simply. "Take care of your daughter. Take care of your family. I hope you find peace." The morning of departure was gray and cold. The women gathered in the camp's central yard, their few belongings packed. Each mother received a care package for the journey: formula, food, diapers, basic medicines, blankets. They were also given larger packages to take with them, supplies from the Red Cross to help their families in Japan. Private O'Brien appeared one last time, his eyes red-rimmed. He gave Yuki the stuffed rabbit. "For the journey," he said through Mrs. Tanaka. Then he pressed a photograph into Haruko's hand, the one of his wife and daughter. On the back, he'd written in careful English, "May all our children know peace." Haruko couldn't speak. She bowed deeply, a gesture of respect and gratitude that transcended language. O'Brien bowed back, awkward, but sincere. The buses came. As they drove through San Francisco one last time, Haruko looked out at the city, intact, prosperous, alive. She thought about the cities in Japan that looked nothing like this anymore. She thought about the long road ahead, the challenges of rebuilding from ashes. But she also thought about what she'd learned here, that humanity persists in unexpected places, that enemies are just people who haven't met yet, that kindness is the most revolutionary act. The ship that took them back to Japan was crowded and uncomfortable. Nothing like the relative comfort of the camp. But the women had care packages, medicine for sick children, and something perhaps more valuable: the knowledge that the world was more complicated than propaganda had taught them. When they arrived in Japan in March 1946, the devastation was worse than Haruko had imagined. The port city was a maze of rubble and makeshift shelters. People were thin, gray-faced, moving with the slow energy of the chronically malnourished. Haruko's mother met her at a Red Cross station 3 days later. The reunion was joyful and heartbreaking at once. Her mother was gaunt, aged decades, but she wept with happiness at seeing her daughter alive and meeting her granddaughter for the first time. "You look well," her mother said, wonder in her voice. "The baby looks healthy. How is this possible?" Haruko told her. She told her everything, about the camp, about the food and medicine, about the American soldiers who helped care for Yuki, about Captain Davis and Private O'Brien, about the care packages and the aid being sent. Her mother listened in silence. When Haruko finished, she simply said, "The world is not what we were taught it was." They rebuilt slowly. The aid from the Red Cross helped. It wasn't enough to solve everything, but it was enough to survive. Life was hard. Japan was broken. The recovery would take decades. But they survived. Years later, when Yuki was old enough to understand, Haruko sat her down and told her the story. She showed her the photograph of Private O'Brien's family, which she'd kept all these years. She showed her the stuffed rabbit, worn from years of love. "Why did they help us?" Yuki asked, confused. "If we were enemies?" Haruko thought carefully. "Because they chose to see us as people, not just as enemies. Because even in war, even after terrible things have happened, humans can still choose kindness. It doesn't erase the terrible things, but it means that terrible things don't have to be the only story." Yuki would grow up to study in America, earning a degree in international relations. She would dedicate her career to fostering understanding between Japan and the United States. She would often tell people about her mother's experience. "My mother always said that the moment that changed her life was when she screamed at the soldier on the dock," Yuki would explain. "She was certain he was going to harm me. Instead, he stepped back. He respected her fear even though he had the power to ignore it. That moment of respect, of recognizing her humanity even though she was his enemy, that was when she began to understand that everything she'd been taught might be wrong." Haruko lived until 2015, dying peacefully at age 92. In her final years, she was interviewed by historians studying Japanese civilian experiences in World War II. She always said the same thing. "The Americans didn't defeat us just with bombs. They defeated us with something more powerful. They showed us a different way. They showed us that even enemies can choose humanity over hatred. That lesson changed me more than any weapon ever could." The stuffed rabbit Private O'Brien gave to Yuki sits now in a museum in Tokyo, part of an exhibition on post-war reconciliation. The plaque reads, "This rabbit was given to Yuki Yamamoto, an 8-month-old Japanese infant, by U.S. Army Private Tommy O'Brien at a relocation camp in Arizona, Christmas 1945. O'Brien had a daughter the same age back in Boston. He spent his own money to buy gifts for Japanese children whose parents had been taught to fear American soldiers. When Yuki's mother, Haruko, first arrived in San Francisco, she carried a cyanide capsule in her mouth. Prepared to kill herself and her daughter rather than face American cruelty. Instead, she found kindness. Instead, she found soldiers who made her baby laugh. This rabbit represents the moment when propaganda met reality, when hate was offered the choice to become understanding, when enemies decided to see each other as human. The war destroyed cities and killed millions, but small gestures of kindness, a stuffed rabbit given with love, helped rebuild what war had torn apart. Visitors to the museum stand before that worn rabbit and read the story. Some cry, some smile. All leave thinking about the enemies in their own lives, the people they've been taught to fear or hate without knowing them, the opportunities for kindness they might have missed. Because the true legacy isn't just Haruko's story. It's the reminder that propaganda fails when confronted with human connection. That hate becomes impossible once you know someone's name, see their face, understand their love for their children. That sometimes the bravest thing is not pulling a trigger. It's extending your hand instead. That the world changes not through grand gestures, but through small moments of choosing compassion over cruelty. That enemies are just people who haven't met yet. And that kindness, even forbidden kindness, even dangerous kindness, is always worth the risk.